Hello, everyone, and welcome to more conversations here on the Western Ag Network. I'm Lane Nordland, and standing by is Russell Nimitz from his home studio. And we're going to be talking about a few of the top headlines that we covered this week on the Western Ag Network. Thanks for joining us on our streaming platforms on YouTube, Facebook, and the audio portion, which is located on the Lanecast Ag Podcast on whatever device you listen to your podcast. And as I mentioned, Russell Nimitz is standing by in the home studio. Russ, I tell you what, it's officially summer here in 2023. It's been a busy time for the Western Ag Network team, but hey, it's already the first part of July, and things have just been pretty crazy around the network and our coverage area as we cover the West. How are things in your neck of the woods this week?
Well, it's sure green down here in southern Montana, where of course I'm based at. And just like you and some of our other teammates, I mean, as we've made our travels across Western Ag Network country in May and June, I think the talk amongst ranchers and farmers, besides some of those big headlines that we're going to talk about during this program, has been all of this recent and beautiful moisture that has just greened the countryside up, making our crops look good, getting them ready for harvest, and of course, that summer pasture that our livestock so desperately need.
That's so true because we've been waiting about a week and a half, 2 weeks to cut hay. I'm finding a few minutes here to come inside. We're going to be in full force out in the field tomorrow. There's no rain in the forecast, which is nice. I'm not cussing the rain because we've been praying for it for some time, but I really need to get a hay crop put up. And who would have thought our dry land was still not going to get cut this close to the 4th of July around north central Montana, where I call home.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other thing that all this moisture and heat is raising a lot of, and you and I, being from Montana's Highline, know a thing or two about is mosquitoes,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of mosquitoes across our region, and just kind of a reminder too for horse owners out there with the mosquito season upon us to, if they haven't already done so, make sure those equine friends are properly vaccinated against West Nile virus. And for those of us that grew up in mosquito country, one of our colognes growing up was DEET. So it's always good to have a can of off or DEET or something like that in the pickup cabs, swather cabs, and you, my friend, too, as you get ready to get out there and cut some of that dryland hay.
Well, I don't live up on I'm like I said, not on the High Line here today, but I call that High Line cologne, the off-brand spray. Um because and they're bad here. I mean, we've had so much sitting water out here in the field and whatnot. It's I'm glad that hopefully it's heating up a little bit and they're going to hang out in the shade a little bit. But hey, as we mentioned, we're going to share a few of our top stories that we had on radio, TV, and our digital platforms throughout the week. We're going to talk about lab grown chicken here today. Also, a great friend retiring from the farm broadcasting industry. He's not fully going away, but you'll know exactly who we're talking about here in just a little bit. Brazilian beef. It's always a big talking point at our cattle grower conventions. We're going to talk about that. Waters of the U.S., the BLM's proposed comment period, farm bill updates, what the spring wheat is looking like, and also, Russell's been hard at work discussing the Snake Rivers dams, and that's going to be kind of our feature conversation here at the end of our chat here today on our weekend programming. But again, thanks for joining us here on YouTube, Facebook, and if you're tuning into the audio on the Lanecast Ag Podcast, we truly thank you for coming in and joining us here today. We're just trying to bring you the top stories in all these different social media type settings. And I feel after this week we should be sponsored by Coors Original, but we'll save that for
Yeah.
after Hayne, after I get all my idiot cubes stacked up here at our place and the round bales stacked as well. And Rouse, I should mention two great sponsors that are helping bring the coverage here this week. Our friends at Ag Risk Advisors, providing all those risk management tools to producers out in the countryside, along with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, for bringing you these conversations here today. But Rouse, one of those top conversations that we talked about earlier this week, and actually for quite some time, is the lab grown meat, the fake meat, the cultured meat in the laboratory. And this week, USDA actually gave the seal of approval to two different companies, Good Meat and Upside Foods. They are going to be allowed to sell their products to consumers. And again, lab grown meat, it's cultivated real animal cells in a laboratory. And that USDA announcement came just on the heels of a no questions letter earlier this year from the Food and Drug Administration. And, cell based meat, it comes from stem cells, from animal fat or muscle tissues of animals. They're cultivated there in the laboratory. And I did a poll on Instagram, Russ, and I asked people, would you eat lab raised meat, specifically chicken, since that's the one that's got the seal of approval, and 98% of my followers said no, they would not eat it. And actually a few cattle producers said yes, they would, just so they knew what it tasted like, so they could talk more about their real natural beef that is one ingredient that they raise out in the countryside. But I guess, would you taste the lab raised meat? That's a question I have for you, I guess.
Well, I probably would give it a taste, just like some of those others in your poll, just to confirm that, why in the world would we want to even do something like this, eat something out of a laboratory, out of a test tube, when America's hardworking cattle producers raise safe and reliable, not to mention delicious four-legged critters, not just across our region, but across America. And I just shake my head, and I've kind of got a frustrated look on my face this week, especially as we head into one of the biggest grilling seasons, times of the year, the 4th of July holiday. And why we're even having to talk about something like this is beyond me. It's crazy, because I get that there's some, originality or some DNA, if you will, from the actual four-legged bovines out there, but it's still nothing, regardless of what breed of cattle you're talking about, like that is actually raised on Mother Earth's land.
Well, and it's so interesting because obviously the chicken was given the seal of approval, but a recent UC Davis study that just came out, and a disclaimer, it hasn't been peer reviewed yet, but this we talked about this about a month ago. The UC Davis study shows that lab grown meat's carbon footprint could be potentially worse than retail beef, just because it takes so many different resources and input to run it through the laboratory process. And which, again, that's a lot of the argument, is that that beef or chicken have a bigger carbon impact, carbon footprint, excuse me, when it comes to that. But I think a lot of the time folks just jump on board because they want to see livestock producers go out of business. But it's so interesting in that study that they really asked the question: would these lab grown items, would it be a food item or a pharmaceutical item? Because currently it's being developed as a pharmaceutical. And so that's just interesting to see how that may play out. But for me, I would probably try it just so I could talk about it and share my experience. But at the end of the day, I'm going to stick with the real natural thing. I'm going to stick with beef. It's out in our pasture. I know where it comes from. I know what went into creating it, and I know its natural resource and environmental impact, personally. So I don't know, but Facebook, Russ, doesn't really like us sharing those stories. um,
Well, it's interesting, Lane, because a lot of times, when it comes to these ag headlines that you and I and the rest of our team cover every single day, all year round, some of these big headlines just float under the radar of Facebook and other social media platforms. And with the case of lab grown chicken, I mean, when that came out, a lot in the industry, a lot of those of us in the know, so to speak, we didn't even know it really came out, because the whole world was focused on the North Atlantic and that missing Titan submersible that had tried to go down and visit the sunken Titanic. And I think, whether it's lab grown meat or a huge ruling either from USDA or FDA, or in most cases the US Supreme Court. I mean, so many times these decisions come out, during quiet times, or they're hid underneath the rug of another mainstream headline. And then we're left afterwards kind of in a reactionary mode, like, what do we do instead of being proactive and being able to truly cover a story? But yeah, you're right. I mean, so many of these egg headlines, livestock more specifically, Facebook just refuses to help us get the real message out there on behalf of America's food producers.
Yeah, so YouTube seems to be a lot better on that front, and maybe I don't know, maybe I should be wearing a tinfoil hat for some of the folks tuning in. But when we look at these, like the TV segment that we turned into digital, talking about the stem cell cultured meat for the lab grown chicken, it had 13 shares and 682 views on our Western Ag Network Facebook page. If a story had 13 shares as a reel on other ones, it'd be up into the few thousands just on 13 shares. It's just so interesting how the algorithm works at not pushing out that type of content. And we see that all the time. People say I'm crazy, but we can put something up about a family ranch talking about livestock production and sustainability, and they've been on the land for years, and Facebook algorithms won't push it out. And so again, very interesting. But since we're on that Facebook topic, Russell, I have noticed a lot. I think ag folks in rural America are just so trusting of each other, and we're seeing so many Facebook duplicate accounts. People say I got hacked. Somebody added me on Facebook. No, somebody duplicated your account. They took your picture, created a separate account with your name on it. That's not a hack. I think we're seeing a lot of that across the board, but rural America, we just trust each other. And so, so-and-so got a new Facebook page. They add them. But we did see some people get hacked recently, and these hackers are pretty genius because they're putting ag products up like, hey, we're trying to sell our horse trailer. And I'm not going to say our friend's name, but his account got hacked. And I'm like, gosh darn, he's got a gooseneck trailer for sale. It's only like 3 years old. I'm going to call him. Then I saw the price of $3,200. I'm like, oh, he got hacked. But there were so many people that were sharing that post, and this poor guy's locked out of his account. And I don't know. It just, I would love to buy cheap equipment. I've been trying to find a hay bind pull behind swather to have on hand here, and you can't believe how many fake uh, products they have out there targeting ag people. But I do see a lot of animal rights people that try to like flag our stuff and have us click on links and try to gain our access. And it's not fun. You just got to kind of be on your toe. It's almost like that one cow that you're trying to get their calf tagged, and you can kind of trust her, but you got to be on your toes. Everybody just needs to be on their toes on Facebook and not click on anything.
Yeah. Pretty soon that mother cow is jumping over a 8-foot high gate and is eating your lunch in the corner of the corral, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as powerful of a tool that social media is, I think it's up to all of us, including those of us in the ag media, to really continue to do our diligence and make sure that, what we're sharing or what we're putting on online or what we're quoting as actual stories is in fact from a real credible source, and not one of these hackers or people that have cloned your profile or whatnot. But we certainly don't want to scare people away from
No.
using social and digital media, because I mean, it truly is blazing a new trail, kind of, so to speak, in how we all communicate, even in the egg industry.
Yeah, we use it. I hate Facebook. I hate it all, but we got to use it for for what we
Yeah.
do. Look at us streaming here today. But on another note, Russell, this past week we saw the announcement that many didn't know about, but those that follow farm broadcasting and know a very familiar voice for several decades. We had a friend announce his retirement, and you've had the opportunity to work with him on set. Who am I talking about here today, Russ?
Well, it's somebody who certainly didn't have to worry about Facebook or social media or digital media back when he started his career many, many years ago. But yes, our dear friend, Max Armstrong, announced his retirement here just recently after nearly 50 some years in actual farm broadcasting, and over 50 years, I believe, in radio and television. And of course, especially in the Midwest, in that greater Chicagoland, WGN country, and the heartland of America. Max was a well known voice and face, along with his teammate, for for the better part of his career, Orion Samuelson. They hosted the Ag Reports on WGN Radio, which is just a blowtorch across the Midwest. And of course, they hosted and teamed up to produce a weekly television program for a lot of years under the brand U.S. Farm Report. And then just here recently, they've been doing television reports under their new company, This Week in Agribusiness. And yeah, it's going to be, when you hear some of these legends, Lane, retiring and deciding to, do something different than farm broadcasting, it catches a lot of us off guard because, those of us that were kids growing up on farms and ranches across America, we tuned into their televised reports. And a lot of us, that's kind of where we at least kind of grew into some sort of interest in pursuing a career in agricultural journalism or broadcasting. And certainly Max Armstrong was one of them. And just a salt of the earth type of guy, as you know. I mean, they don't get any better than Max Armstrong, except, for a lot of those John Deere lovers out there, they might have a little bit of a complaint because of his absolute passion for Case and International and red paint on that tractor. But there is no bigger supporter of rural America and serving young people and helping to pave the way, whether it's farm broadcasting or supporting FFA and 4-H and other youth organizations out there than Max Armstrong. And yeah, I did have the opportunity a few times to actually fly back to Chicago and co-host This Week in Agribusiness with him. I think I was actually one of the very first individuals to actually sit in Orion Samuelson's broadcast chair when he couldn't be there and help Max and his team, produce their weekly nationwide television program. And what an honor that truly was. And so we certainly only wish Max and of course his family the very best in retirement. And like you said, he's not going to go away completely, and visiting with some of his teammates there, he's still going to do Max's Tractor Shed and still, help out the new full-time host, Mike Pearson, in, doing some fill-in work. And I would have to think we're still going to hear him on the radio just a little bit too.
No, truly a legend in the industry. And I should take the opportunity to announce my retirement.
You better not.
I just had my birthday, so I can retire right now. I can file. Is that how you do it?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're a contract employee, so you don't even really have to give me any sort of notice. I'll just not be looking for any of your reports anytime soon.
I think a great comparison of Max Armstrong and Orion Samuelson and Russell Nimitz and Lane Nordland. They're like the Nordstroms to we're like the Kmart special compared to those guys, right?
Yeah, we kind of are, but every once in a while we do give out a nice blue light special. So
we try to. I don't think Max Armstrong ever had to turn his monitor on behind him during a report like I just did. It timed out on me. But hey, Russ, thanks for kind of sharing a little more on Max Armstrong and of course, a legend in farm broadcasting and a great advocate and voice for those in rural America and red tractors, which is great to see. I think we see too many green tractors out there all the time. There's nothing wrong with any of that equipment as long as it works for all of our enthusiasts out there. But hey, we have a lot to talk about coming up. Brazilian beef imports, waters of the U.S., the BLM's proposed rule, and hey, stick around. We're going to go into depth on the Snake River dams and how important they are, not only for getting grain down the road, but for feeding the nation and the world. But first, we're going to take a few moments and hear some words from our friends at Ag Risk Advisors.
Ready for a real PRF partner?
He was willing to track us for a year and provide that data back to us for a year. That's a guy making a pretty big investment.
At Ag Risk Advisors, this isn't our first rodeo. We are one of the most experienced in pasture rangeland forage. Honesty, commitment, trust. Many companies use these words. At Ag Risk Advisors, we earn them.
Again, a big thank you to Ag Risk Advisors for bringing you these conversations here today. I'm Lane Nordland, joined by the one and only Russell Nimitz. We're here with the Western Ag Network. Thanks for joining us on YouTube. If you're on the YouTube app, make sure and subscribe to our channel today. We're going to be bringing you conversations not only here on Sunday morning, but every single day of the week, bringing you the most important headlines impacting producers in Western Ag Network country, but also across the nation as well. Russ, hey, we've been talking about Brazilian beef imports. Well, probably since before I was born, but a lot of headlines coming up in terms of congressional hearings, legislation that almost all livestock groups are behind to really limit those imports or halt the imports based on animal health concerns from the South American nations. But what was that headline in terms of Brazilian beef that you shared on air this week?
Well, it truly is a big, big issue for the U.S. livestock industry, more specifically right now for the cattle business guys out there. And as you mentioned, it isn't very often you get bipartisan support in either the House or the Senate, or even bipartisan support in the countryside amongst all the different cattle organizations out there. But when it comes to this issue, Brazilian either live cattle or Brazilian beef imports, this surely is one of them. And just a few days ago, the powerful U.S. Senate Finance Committee held a hearing on this very subject to really dive into, the do's and don'ts of what is going on in South America regarding either, the actual on the ground live cattle production with ranchers down there, or on the beef side, from some of the likes like JBS and other large meat processors in getting that fresh beef or frozen beef, being allowed into this countryside. And one of those testifying on behalf of America's cattle producers during that powerful Senate Finance Committee hearing was Montana's own Leo McDonald Jr.
We didn't do it by degrading our environment through illegal deforestation and poor farming and grazing practices, nor did we use it by using forced labor, both slave and child labor, or by bribing meat inspectors to improperly launder and dump beef into the international market and even our own markets that had fraudulent laboratory checks, or by exporting product that was rampant food safety concerns, including the finding of blood clots, bone chips, abscesses, and I can go on. That's been a chronic problem with Brazil. Or by failing to notify our world communities in a timely manner when we had FMD outbreaks, foot and mouth disease, or BSE. No, the U.S. cattle industry didn't go under those corruptive practices.
And Lane, of course, with the heart of the summer business meeting session for some of the national cattle organizations already upon us, of course, U.S. Cattlemen's will be meeting in Reno here in just a few days. NCBA at the end of the month will be having their summer business meeting in San Diego. And then even in August, RCAF USA will be meeting in the Black Hills of South Dakota. So this is one of those big issues that I'm sure will be addressed at all three of these busy summer conventions for three of America's largest cattle organizations.
No, very, very true. Thanks for that update. Since you had Leo on, I had this picture over against my wall here, and I found this in a thrift shop down in Bozeman, of all places. And it's for one of the Midland Bull Test sales. I don't know what year it was, but it says 15 years from now, we won't know what pickup he'll be driving or what music he'll be listening to, but you can be sure if he is in the cattle business, he'll be using or benefiting from the Midland program. I thought that was so dang cool, and I just didn't want some out-of-stater to buy it and put it in their Yellowstone-themed mansion up at the Yellowstone Club. So I bought that. I don't even know if I've ever told Leo about that, but I just thought that was so cool, and I don't even remember what I paid for it, but it was for sale there in Bozeman, and I'm like, yep. That little Leo and his family have had a big role in agriculture, not only in Montana, but across the nation in the livestock industry and on the advocacy front. I just thought I'd share that. Yeah. We might put a little better picture of that up there, but I thought that was pretty cool, and I didn't want some out-of-stater to put that up or put it in a Cracker Barrel or something.
That is super cool. I mean, And Leo truly is a legend in the U.S. beef cattle industry. And during that hearing, you know, one of the very first things he did was recognize Iowa GOP Senator Chuck Grassley, who was sitting in on that hearing. I think he is a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and he's just Leo specifically, acknowledged Senator Grassley for all of his years and hard work. Making sure that America's beef cattle producers have an industry to survive and still participate in. And Leo mentioned, all those years ago in the 90s, when Leo really started getting more and more national traction out there, when he started to address all those live Canadian imports coming in and traveling through states like Montana. And we're at that time, flooding our domestic cattle market with imported live product out of Canada.
Yep. Well, again, a great update there on that front, and little fun there with Leo. Would Chuck Grassley would he eat the lab grown meat? I
I
doubt he
think
would.
Chuck Grassley would literally pick up the lab grown meat either in the test tube or between two pieces of hamburger buns and probably throw it across the room at one of his colleagues that he probably doesn't care too much about.
Oh, well, let's stick out in Washington, Russ, where again, a lot of issues that have impacted producers for many years, and waters of the U.S. That has been one of those key issues that producers have advocated against for several years, in the overreach of federal regulations. And waters of the U.S. definitely has been in the headlines. During the Trump administration, the Obama WOTUS rule was repealed and replaced. When President Biden took office, the Trump rule was then removed and replaced with the WOTUS 2023 rule. But all that was put on hold with the U.S. Supreme Court just a few weeks ago, ruling in favor of the Sackett family out of Iowa, and really putting the WOTUS rule on hold in the significant nexus test, in which the Bureau or the I want to say Bureau of Land Management. We're going to talk about them later.
Yeah.
That the Army Corps and the EPA were utilizing to determine what really was a waters of the U.S. under the Clean Water Act. Well, just this week, the EPA announced in a court filing that they were going to rewrite the 2023 Biden Waters of the U.S. rule on or before September 1st of this year. That comes after the Supreme Court ruling in May that struck down the Biden rule. This information all came from a motion filed in federal court in North Dakota. The EPA was requesting that the court not grant an injunction for 26 states where the rule is on hold. Of course, an injunction in the North Dakota court, and then an injunction in Texas, 26 states, and many of which we cover here in Western Ag Network country. So they essentially they said, we're doing this in good faith. We're going to have a new rule. Let's please just do away with this injunction. And it's costing us too much money. But at the same time, the EPA and the Biden administration have not officially rolled back the WOTUS rule that the court says is not following the law. Here's a comment from South Dakota rancher and president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Todd Wilkinson, on the frustration in which producers are having that rule hasn't been pulled back, even though they're asking the courts to vacate an injunction in the court of North Dakota.
When faced with a decision from the Supreme Court saying that you made the wrong choice, EPA, how is it that our administration decides to still force producers to have to spend their money to go in and then seek legal relief? I find that just ridiculous.
Again, I caught up with Wilkinson during the Montana Stock Growers mid-year meeting about a week and a half ago, and the EPA in its court filing said that they are respectfully requesting that the court stay their case because good cause exists for their request. Federal defendants are developing a new rule to amend the 2023 rule consistent with Sackett. But again, that was a lot of frustration that the court handed that down, Russ, and then they still haven't pulled back that rule or halted it themselves, even though it's on stay and more than half of the states here in the U.S. But a lot of frustration on that WOTUS front.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's such a controversial issue, and it's one of those issues that we've been talking about since the Obama presidency. And I think, during your full interview with Todd Wilkinson, he too also mentioned what in the world is going on in Washington, D.C. these days when the nation's highest court, the U.S. Supreme Court, can make a ruling, and yet an administration or congressional folks on both sides of the aisle in both chambers almost like they ignore it and still plow forward with their own agenda. It leaves a lot of folks wondering what in the heck is going on.
Yeah. Very, very true. But hey, obviously a big win for landowners, for farmers and ranchers in their eyes with that Sackett versus EPA case. But on a more positive note, we are seeing some more opportunities for pulse crop producers here in the U.S. Russ, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, some big news here of late for U.S. pulse growers like those here in our region. Just a few days ago, the nation of India announced through the World Trade Organization that it was finally going to reduce some of those export hampering tariffs that were really limiting the U.S.'s ability to get our high quality pulses like chickpeas and lentils into the world's largest pulse market. And I was able to catch up with Northern Pulse Growers Association's Vice President, Matt McCabe, out of Ekalaka, Montana. And he explained to me why this was such a big headline for pulse growers like himself.
Well, Russell, India imposed retaliatory trade tariffs on chickpea, lentil, and pea exports to India about 6 years ago, and more or less just closed off our biggest export market for all those crops. So this should be a great opportunity to rebuild those relationships with Indian buyers and hopefully help out the market.
Now, to kind of put it into perspective, just how large of a market, an export market like India is to the U.S. pulse industry. 6 years ago, before those tariffs went into place, the U.S. exported nearly $157 million worth of U.S. pulses into India compared to last year's mere $1 million. So, Lane, that is pretty black and white, just how important these export markets, in this case, for the U.S. pulse industry really are.
Yeah, very, very, very good news, and it's been an issue that has been worked on for several years, and so a great time as those crops, especially in states like Montana, where producers are. Montana's the biggest producer of pulses in the nation, and we've saw some drought and whatnot over the last few years in that region of our coverage area. So that's very welcome news, especially for folks that have pulses or getting ready, maybe kept pulses in storage, hoping this market would open up. A lot of good news on that front. And I was actually
one of the things that did come out of it, Lane, on a positive front, if we can talk just a second about, I mean, it did kind of force the industry to work with the checkoff side of the pulse industry, whether it's the Montana Pulse Crop Committee or the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council, to find a home for the majority of the pulses grown in America when that Indian market was all but shut out. And they really went to work and used producer checkoff dollars to help increase even more demand for those high quality pulses that are raised right here at home with our own domestic customers.
Well, as Russell mentioned, a big opportunity for the U.S. pulse industry, and for the full story on this, just visit us online at Western Ag Network, online, of course. Hey, Russ, we were talking about government overreach with that Sackett and the EPA case and the WOTUS rule, but a rule that just magically appeared earlier this year was the Bureau of Land Management's proposed conservation rule. And for folks that aren't familiar with what this rule is, all of us are on board for conservation, but ranchers, and especially federal lands ranchers, the cattle and sheep producers who graze for just a short period of time each year on the nation's federal lands, specifically BLM lands, are pretty upset with the efforts of the Biden administration and the BLM's lead, Tracy Stone Manning, in pushing the proposed rule forward, mainly because there was hardly any stakeholder input. There was only 3 in-person sessions held in Albuquerque, Reno, and Denver. A lot of folks on BLM country were not able to be there in person, and that comment period was requested to be extended to actually have some stakeholder input. Advocates like the Public Lands Council, they asked for 105 days, I believe, in extension. Well, the BLM gave them 15 days, so they extended that till July 5th. And Russ, when Paul Humphrey, our videographer, and I were down in Steamboat Springs for the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, we got up with Colorado's very own Tim Canterbury. He's also the vice president of the Public Lands Council, and Sigrid Johans, the director out there with the National Public Lands Council on the policy side. I sat down with him for a full-length interview where we talked about it, but Canterbury really shared his frustration with what they are calling an effort by the government just to push this rule through without stakeholder input. Here's a bit of our conversation from Steamboat Springs last week.
There is not one of us that is against conservation. We all live and breathe conservation. So that's not the issue here. The issue is the process that was used. I think that it was totally set up and totally disregarded the federal land users, especially the grazing, the livestock industry, to hold 3 meetings in 3 states and leave all those other folks out, especially when you look at Idaho, Oregon, Washington. The amount of travel that those folks would have had to have undertaken to have taken part in one of those public meetings is totally disrespectful and disregarded the livestock industry, the permittees that's affected.
And Russ, again, a lot of frustration. And as Canterbury said, producers aren't against conservation, but they're against this this proposed rule that is putting a veil or almost rose-colored glasses over the public's eyes, utilizing the term conservation and pushing a rule forward without any stakeholder input. So a lot of frustration there. So that's true. Other than higher calf prices, this has been the talk of all of our meetings this year, whether it's a Farm Bureau summer meetings in our region or our cattle and stock grower meetings. A big conversation, and definitely it's still going to be a conversation September 5th through the 7th in Pendleton, Oregon, where the Public Lands Council's annual meeting will be held. But you've been hearing it, and I've been hearing it. A lot of frustration in the countryside.
Well, yeah, and that comment deadline that we had hoped to get a little bit more than just a couple of weeks extension on is coming up fast. I think is it either July 5th? Is that right, Lane, or July 15th? I can't remember, but anyways, it's right around the corner. And not only are farmers and ranchers not against conservation, they're leaders in it. And it was just truly almost a slap in the face, by the Interior Department and the Bureau of Land Management, where this new conservation rule just magically appeared after all the hard work and truly, America's public lands really thought they had been doing the best job possible in having that 2-way open door conversation with agency personnel and certainly, administrative type personnel, whether it was during the Trump years or here most recently with the Biden folks.
Yep. Well, again, it is July 5th. That's the deadline for the proposed BLM rule. Get your comments in. Again, more details can be found at westernagnetwork.com, and we'll have a link to that full conversation with Tim Canterbury and Sigrid Johans there with the Public Lands Council in our description and on all of our YouTube and Facebook pages as well. But, sticking out in Washington, D.C., Farm Bill, Russ, that's been a big topic as of late, and there's a lot of hope that a farm bill can actually get done before it expires in September this year. I guess, what's it like on that front, talking with some of the elected officials out in D.C.?
Yeah, well, they're hoping that they can get one done too, because the current one expires on September 30th of this year. And, late last year and certainly the beginning of this year, there was a lot of hope and a lot of positive traction and a lot of positive headlines, with members of Congress and agency personnel that were going to work together and get this thing done. But it truly is. I mean, the clock is ticking. September 30th isn't too far away now. And a couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to visit with Montana U.S. Senator Jon Tester, who's had quite a few field hearings, if you will, across Big Sky country. And we talked about what he's hearing from some of those farmers and ranchers who have attended some of his public meetings.
From 30,000 feet, don't screw it up. I mean, the current farm bill is working pretty darn well, and we don't want to screw it up. But more specifically, conservation programs like EQIP, really, really important. Need to make sure they're voluntary. Need to have a better reference price. The last farm bill was written in 2018. I think the reference price for wheat's about 5.5. Things have changed since 2018. That needs to be bumped up. And what I hear every time, it happens every mouth that opens, is crop insurance is really important. We got to have that safety net. And if you can do some things to expand a few more crops on it, like say a cover crop or a camelina, please do, because the landscape and production agriculture in Montana has changed a lot over the last couple of decades. Where it used to just be wheat and barley and oats. Now we're raising a lot of pulse crops. We're raising a lot of oil seeds. We've got cover crops going on. So, make sure the crop insurance meets the needs of the farmers that are out there. Those are probably the three different buckets that I've been focused on with the Ag Committee.
Again, a huge headline, Lane, here in farm and ranch country, as the current farm bill will expire on September 30th. And of course, members of Congress right now on a recess for the 4th of July holiday. But time is running out because they'll go back to work for just a little bit, and then they'll head into their very long August recess, which only leaves them a few days in the month of September to get a lot of work done. And sometimes, as we both know, agricultural policy doesn't necessarily rise to the top of priorities in the nation's capital.
Very, very true. Well, hopefully harvest is wrapped up by the time the farm bill negotiations are finalized here. And speaking of harvest, I know in the Southern Plains, the winter wheat crop that's getting harvested. Progress going there. A lot of storms going through that region, but again, that crop really impacted by drought and freeze, especially there in the Southern Plains, parts of Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. But the spring wheat crop, it's actually not in very good shape, and on a historical level, things are rating wise are some of the lowest crop condition ratings in several decades. Let's check in with USDA's Brad Rippey and see exactly how that spring wheat crop is shaping up here this summer.
We do have a crop that's not in the greatest of shape. It's okay, but it's only 50% good to excellent, 12% very poor to poor. Not much change from last week, but that is below last year's numbers when we were sitting at 59% good to excellent and 8% very poor to poor. Breaking it down by state, we do see South Dakota with the lowest rated spring wheat, currently 33% of the crop very poor to poor in that state.
Now, other states like North Dakota, 16% of the spring wheat rated poor to very poor, 35% fair, and 49% good to excellent. Over in Washington state, 15% of the crop rated poor to very poor and 47% good to excellent. Montana, though, actually shaping up pretty good, and the drought monitor really improving in that neck of the nation. Montana seeing just 2% of the crop rated poor to very poor, 49% fair, and 49% good. And actually, it's just 2% poor. There's not even a very poor rating on that, just to correct myself. So out my door, the spring wheat looks really good where our neighbors have planted here this year. So I'm crossing our fingers that producers are able to get a good crop put up, but I really wish the prices were reflecting that. It's just this past week was a roller coaster for those wheat prices. Just depending, corn really drug them down, brought them up, and issues in the Black Sea. So I know we share markets a lot on our radio and TV programs throughout the week, but it's just been interesting watching those grain markets really play off the corn in the Black Sea region.
Yeah, it sure has. And of course, I mean, our own production troubles or concerns here at home, along with those Black Sea issues last year, were really what drove the wheat market to some of their highest levels in recent years. And this time of the year, even with crop quality issues like you just mentioned, we're in the winter wheat harvest. Since the beginning of time, there's always been harvest pressure on prices. And there's going to be harvest pressure continuing probably this summer as we approach spring wheat harvest. In a month and a half, 2 months from now. But bottom line is the U.S. wheat production number, no matter how you look at it, what state you're talking about, isn't in the greatest shape supply wise.
Yep, very true. Well, we're going to talk about one of those grain corridors here in the United States that has been the center of a lot of political discussion and advocacy work, both pro and con, when it comes to having grain and other items moved down through the Snake River dams. That's a top issue we've been covering for quite some time. Russell and the crew have put together a nice report on that. We're going to come back with that as our feature conversation to wrap up today's agriculture headlines and conversations here on the Western Ag Network. But first, these words from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association.
When it comes to the beef business, there's no room for gray area. The decisions being made in Washington affect the future of the beef industry, the livelihood of your fellow farmers and ranchers. Your National Cattlemen's Beef Association knows there's what benefits cattlemen and there's what doesn't. Visit ncba.org to learn more.
Well, as we come back to our conversation today, discussing all the issues that we've covered, and this is just a small portion of the ag issues we've covered on radio, TV, and digital this week, but enjoying bringing you this coverage here on Sunday or whenever you're tuning into the Western Ag Network on YouTube, Facebook, and on our podcast platform with the Lanecast Ag Podcast. But Russ, we've been teasing it throughout the show today, but the Snake River dams, a big topic in the West in terms of conservation and stewardship and feeding the world and getting grain down to the ports. Give us a quick overview before we watch this feature that the crew has put together on this subject.
Well, as folks have heard all of us say time and time again, water truly is the lifeblood of the ag industry. And utilizing waterways, especially in the Pacific Northwest, to transport some of these high quality commodities that we raise in states like Montana and North Dakota, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, using those waterways like the Columbia River. In this case, using the Snake River in Washington state to get those barley and wheat crops to those export markets in some of those terminal places like Vancouver and Portland is absolutely critical. But the Snake River has become a target by environmentalists who basically are blaming the dams for the salmon population's current numbers, when in all reality, the Snake River and those dams have been in place for a lot of years. And not only are they helping farmers and ranchers raise those high quality agricultural products, but they're providing a lot of electricity to not just rural areas of the Pacific Northwest, but certainly to some of those metropolitan areas like Seattle. And so recently we had the opportunity to visit with Columbia Grain International's Jeff Van Pevenage, as well as the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association's Heather Stebbings, about this very big topic that impacts everybody here in the Pacific Northwest, that truly has kind of pitted farmers against fish.
For decades, environmentalists have argued that breaching the 4 dams in southeast Washington state is the best method to restore the threatened and endangered salmon populations of the Columbia Basin. Last year, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is tasked with salmon recovery efforts under the Endangered Species Act, recommended removal of the dams. However, proponents of the dams say the benefits of the dams can't be replaced.
These dams carry 65% of the wheat that goes out of the P&W corridor. So they're important from the standpoint of that they're the most carbon neutral form of transportation for U.S. wheat.
On the irrigation side, that's another area where we would see, a huge loss for our region and nation. If dam breaching were to occur, we would lose the irrigation behind the Ice Harbor Dam in particular, and that irrigates about 50,000 acres here in the Northwest. So that supports about $2 billion in economic value in the region, 10,000 jobs.
Breaching the Snake River dams would require an act of Congress, with Democrats holding the majority in 2020 and the Biden administration signaling support for restoring historic salmon runs. It appeared dam removal was on the government's fast track. However, with Republicans winning back the majority in the House, Washington's GOP representatives Kathy McMorris Rodgers and Dan Newhouse introduced a bill this spring to help keep the dams in place. In the Senate, Republican Steve Daines of Montana and Idaho's Jim Risch sent forth similar legislation. Daines, Risch, and GOP Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho also recently sent a letter to Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm urging the administration to advocate for and preserve the Snake River dams. The senators wrote, "Hydropower is a reliable and carbon-free resource that provides power to millions of Americans. Despite this, certain voices in the Biden administration continue to advocate for breaching dams and reducing the system's benefits, which would have far-reaching and devastating consequences." According to Columbia Grain President and CEO Jeff Van Pevenage, losing hydro generation is only one of the energy impacts that would be brought about if the dams were breached.
We cannot presently move enough rail transportation to the marketplace. And if we need the alternative forms of transportation like barge traffic, and truck traffic is not really an option from so far away, it would be the most expensive, the most polluting form of transportation to the marketplace, as well as the most inefficient form of transportation.
Now, those energy costs would have a ripple effect, says Heather Stebbings of the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association.
You eliminate the dams, you increase costs for energy because you eliminate hydropower, and that would ultimately either be absorbed by the farmer or passed along to the consumer, again, increasing the cost of our food that we buy at the grocery stores.
How the dams impact the supply and prices at those grocery stores in the Northwest population centers is a task facing advocates for the dams.
It's a challenge to help folks understand on the west side the value that those projects provide because they're more disconnected from them. They're not right in their backyard. And so the more we can tell that story on the west side in particular, I think the more will help folks understand the value of the projects.
I think when they start comparing that to the joy of looking at the orca whales out in Puget Sound, which seems to be one of the biggest environmentalist comments today, is that, boy, the orca whales are going away because of the dams on the Snake River. I think when they have to start paying that food bill, they'll maybe get a little different view of what the value is to them from having these Snake River dams and from keeping U.S. food costs competitive.
Van Pevenage says now's the time for farmers in the region to make sure that their voices are heard.
And this isn't just a Washington, Idaho, Oregon thing. This spreads itself all the way into Montana because when the rail has to service all the Washington, Idaho grain, it means Montana grain could miss out, could get delayed, could see their costs increase as well. So it's not just a local thing, but they need to get together. They need to actively talk with their Congress people, whether that be at the local state level as well as the federal level that are out there. They need to have their voices heard and they need to be loud about it.
And Lane, when it comes to this very important issue, at least for now, it looks like the tide has turned back in favor of farmers, grain shippers, and energy producers here in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, thanks for that report, Russell. And for all of our viewers, if you want to watch that in more depth, just visit us online at Western Ag Network and on our YouTube page as well, if you'd like to share that report as well. But, we talk about fish, but grizzly bear is also a big issue. And we'll play the video here. But it wasn't Smokey the Bear going door to door in Ulm, Montana here this week. It was Mama Grizzly and two cubs going through a residential neighborhood on the prairie. We talk about these animals and the emotions that come in with the general public that doesn't have to live with an apex predator like a grizzly bear literally in your front yard. Gosh darn, I mean, you watch this video, Russ. What's your reaction? What would it be like if a grizzly was going door to door in Billings, Montana, and not the sparsely populated Ulm, Montana?
Yeah, it would sure in the heck grab a lot more of attention of our mainstream media. I know that, and it would become a very serious issue. I mean, in places like Billings, where I'm at, Montana's largest city, when it's a black bear in a tree or something that comes into the city limits, everybody is, oh, it's cute and cuddly and whatnot. But a black bear is no grizzly bear, and there's a big difference. And I mean, the fact of the matter is there's just a lot more grizzlies, not just in Montana, but the greater Yellowstone area. And that's why there's such a big push to try to get the apex predator, like we've been able to do with wolves, off of the federal endangered species list and return management back over to the individual states to try to get the numbers back under some sort of control. So you don't have a grizzly bear, a mama grizzly bear and her cubs, trucking through rural areas, or one of these days they are going to be going through bigger areas like Great Falls where you're at, or Billings where I'm at, or the Missoulas of the world, or Jackson Hole,
There's enough
like
grizzlies
that.
in Missoula. There's enough grizzlies in Missoula
That's
as
right.
it is.
Yeah, we don't even want to talk about that. But
Go Bobcats. Well, Russ, I just wanted to share that video. That was one of the popular ones popping up here this week. Again, not Smokey the Bear going door to door there, talking about forest fire. But, it's been a fun conversation here today. I just kind of shaking up some of our top stories and conversations we've had throughout the week. But happy 4th of July coming up here, Russ.
yeah, happy 4th of July to you and yours. And as we mentioned at the top of the program, truly is one of the biggest grilling times of the year. So weather looks like it's going to cooperate. Of course, we barbecue all year round in places like Western Ag Network country. But most importantly, get out and celebrate America's birthday and everything that we have available at our fingertips, and what America still truly stands for.
Or for those of us making hay during this holiday season, stay safe, take a little break, go see family and friends, but have little breakdowns and have a successful hay harvest as well. Well, with that, friends, it'll do it for this conversation with our ag headlines on the Western Ag Network. Make sure and subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, and also if you're listening to the audio on the Lanecast Ag Podcast. Thanks for joining us. On behalf of Russell Nimitz and the entire Western Ag Network crew, I'm Lane Nordlund. Have a great day, and we'll catch you next time.